I watched the plotters lean closer as the sea reports stacked up, and my hands stayed steady on the stamps. I knew a correction was missing, and the system kept moving as if ink could outrun miles of dark water. When the signal surfaced in the wrong tray, the hour it had stolen felt heavier than any reprimand. I heard the orders go out at last, and imagined escorts searching empty ocean while ships burned beyond the chart. After that, every folder I touched sounded like a clock. March 17th, 1943. Liverpool, in the Western Approaches Command Area. The Battle of the Atlantic was at its hard midpoint. Winter seas still broke over the bows of slow merchantmen. Britain's survival depended on convoys moving in numbered columns at regulated speeds. They travelled under escort in narrow bands of air cover. Every course change, every report of ice, and every reassignment of escorts began as a signal. Most of those signals began on shore. They began in rooms lit for blackout conditions. They began on desks crowded with message forms, route charts, and the ticking of clocks. In the convoy plotting section of a naval operations office, a junior civilian clerk worked the afternoon watch. He was not a strategist. He did not brief admirals. He was one of many who kept the paper system moving. He copied incoming messages from the teleprinter. He checked the address line. He placed them into the correct tray for the watch officers and the convoy route file. The work was routine, repetitive, and unforgiving. A single misread letter group could send a message to the wrong folder. A single delay could turn a report into stale information. The operational situation that day was familiar. An eastbound convoy had been brought in through bad weather. A westbound convoy, loaded with fuel, food, and war materials, was assembling to head into the North Atlantic lanes. U-boat traffic reports suggested several submarines shifting north. They were seeking the gap between air patrol ranges. The escort group assigned to the westbound convoy was limited. Destroyers were stretched across multiple tasks. Corvettes operated with worn machinery and tired crews. Routing officers were under instructions to keep convoys moving and avoid predictable tracks. They also had to balance speed against ships that could not sprint through heavy seas. The clerk's shift began with the usual flow. Short acknowledgements, weather summaries from Iceland and Northern Ireland stations, course instructions to small coastal convoys. A few signals marked immediate that went straight to the watch officer's desk. He stamped times, he logged serial numbers, he filed carbon copies. He did not have authority to interpret the substance. He could still see patterns. When contact reports increased, the priority forms came faster. When aircraft were grounded, the routing traffic carried more caution. He watched those rhythms because they told him whether a watch would be calm or punishing. That afternoon, an incoming message concerned a convoy signal that needed to move quickly. It related to the westbound convoy's sailing time and a rendezvous point with an escort element moving out from the Clyde. The message was not dramatic on its face. It was a correction, a change in a grid reference, a clarification of timing tied to tide and port conditions. It arrived as a strip of paper with groups of letters and numbers. It was decoded into the routing instruction set used by the office. The clerk handled it as he handled hundreds of others. He tore the paper strip. He matched it to the form. He wrote the header. He checked the convoy designation, the serial, and the date-time group. He then reached for the correct folder on the rack. There were many. Convoy numbers could be similar. Some differed by a single letter. In a room where staff were rotated, where temporary personnel filled gaps, and where fatigue built over weeks, mistakes did not always announce themselves. He placed that signal into the wrong tray. It was not thrown away. It was not hidden. It was simply filed under a different convoy's route file. That folder would not be reviewed until later. The watch officer who needed it did not see it. The routing section, expecting the correction, continued working from the earlier instruction. The first hours after that error did not show immediate consequence. The convoy sailed. Merchant captains kept station as best they could. The escorts formed their screen. A destroyer took the lead. A corvette held the outer arc. A smaller escort vessel worked to maintain sonar coverage in rough water. The North Atlantic in March did not allow neat geometry. Screening patterns were adjusted constantly. Lookouts struggled with spray and darkness. Radio discipline was strict. It was strict because transmissions could be found, fixed, and exploited. On shore, the operations office followed the convoy's progress through plotted reports. Position signals arrived at intervals. They were entered on charts. The watch officer expected the escort rendezvous to occur on the revised timing. The escort element departing from the Clyde operated under its own sailing orders. It had been told to join at a specific location and time. That instruction depended on the corrected signal being applied. Without it, the convoy and the escort element were now moving toward two different points on a cold, dark ocean. The mismatch was small in the arithmetic of a chart. A few hours. A change in latitude and longitude that looked modest on paper. At sea it meant miles of separation. It meant the escort element would arrive at empty water and begin searching. It meant the convoy, expecting reinforcement, would continue with fewer escorts than planned. Yeah, it also meant the convoy would do so in a zone where intelligence suggested submarines were waiting. The first indication of trouble came as a routine radio traffic. An escort commander reported that the reinforcement had not yet joined. The watch officer checked the expected schedule. He assumed delay due to weather, engine trouble, or a late sailing. He requested clarification. The response from the Clyde command was brief. Their ships had sailed on time. They had reached the rendezvous point. No convoy was there. They were commencing a search pattern. Fuel consumption was rising. In the plotting room, the watch officer reviewed the file. He went through previous signals. He checked the route. He cross-referenced with the convoy sailing report. The documents agreed with each other. They agreed because the correction was not among them. The clerk watched from his desk as officers leaned over the charts. No one shouted. There was no theatrical moment. There was only the tightening of time. Every minute meant more distance and less flexibility. Doctrine governed decisions. The office was cautious about ordering changes without confirmation. Wrong instructions could produce collisions, dispersion, or panic. The watch officer sent an urgent request for positions from both the convoy and the escort element. He asked for an immediate report from the convoy commodore. He asked for the escort commander's precise location. He did so while balancing radio silence and the need for clarity. Each message was weighed. Each transmission carried a risk. The convoy's reply arrived late. Encoding took time. Communications in heavy weather were limited. The convoy was where it should have been on the original route. It had made the scheduled course change. The Commodore reported worsening seas and reduced speed among the slowest ships. The escort commander confirmed their screen was intact but thin. He noted increased radar contacts that could be false echoes. He also noted a single sonar contact that had not developed. The Clyde escort element replied separately. They had searched and found nothing. They could not maintain the search indefinitely. Their fuel states demanded a decision. Return and refuel, or continue searching in hopes of making contact before dusk. They requested direction. The operations office now faced a problem that did not fit neatly into paperwork. If the convoy continued without reinforcement, escort strength would remain below the planned level in the most dangerous portion of passage. If the convoy altered course to meet the escort element, it would require a broadcast instruction. It might also move into worse weather, or toward a patrol area already suspected. If the escort element turned toward the convoy's reported position, it would take hours to close. The gap created by a small filing error had become an operational choice. In the clerk's routine work, another message arrived. It was a copy of the earlier correction transmitted again as a follow-up by a different office. This time it carried a stronger priority marking. The clerk saw the designation. He recognized the numbers. He felt unease when paper did not match expectation. He checked the folder on the rack. He did not find the earlier copy where it should have been. He did not have authority to halt the watch officer's work. He did not have rank. He was a civilian in a uniformed system. Yet he understood something simple. If the correction existed and had not been applied, the office might be directing ships toward a rendezvous that no longer matched reality. He looked again at the folder labels. In the dim light and the press of voices, it was possible to misread a convoy designation by a single character. He searched the adjacent trays quietly. Clerks were expected to be efficient and nearly invisible. He found the earlier correction in a file for a different convoy. It was stamped with the correct time. It had been sitting, unnoticed, for hours. There was no dramatic confession. He did not stand and announce his failure. He moved to the senior clerk responsible for supervising the filing system. He placed both copies together and pointed to the header. The senior clerk read it quickly. He understood what it implied. Protocol mattered. Messages were supposed to flow in a controlled way. Time mattered more. The senior clerk took the papers directly to the watch officer's desk. He did not lecture. He did not demand. He set the correction in front of the officer and said quietly that it had been misfiled. The watch officer did not change much in expression. He did not have time for anger. He read the correction and compared it to the plotted positions. The convoy and the Clyde escort element had been aimed at two different meeting points. The convoy was now committed to a route that made the original rendezvous impossible without a major alteration. The escort element's search had been searching for something that was never going to arrive. The correction did not undo the hours already lost. It did provide a clear path for the next decision. The watch officer could now issue orders that aligned convoy and reinforcement, rather than chasing uncertainty. He drafted a set of instructions. The Clyde escort element would abandon the empty rendezvous point. They would proceed at best speed toward the convoy's reported position. The convoy would not reverse course. It would adjust its next scheduled course change slightly to shorten the closing distance within routing safety limits. A separate message was sent to an air station to extend patrols if possible. Weather reports made that uncertain. These were not bold moves, they were careful corrections. They were the kind of adjustments that kept convoys from fracturing. They still had to be executed under pressure. They had to be executed with limited communications. They had to be executed in a sea that punished every miscalculation. The consequences of the earlier misfile continued to unfold. While the reinforcement escorts steamed to catch up, the convoy passed into an area where U-boat groups had been reported days earlier. Intelligence was never exact. Reports could be stale. Submarines could shift. But it was enough for the escort commander to tighten his screen and increase lookouts, even as fatigue rose. During the evening, a merchant ship on the outer column reported a sighting. A brief shape on the surface, awake in the dark. The report was cautious. The sea played tricks. The escort commander treated it seriously. One corvette was detached to investigate. It ran a sonar search. It found nothing certain. It returned to station. The detachment briefly thinned the screen further. Near midnight, a torpedo struck. It hit a ship in the middle columns, a freighter carrying mixed cargo. The explosion was dull at first, then it brightened as fuel and cargo ignited. The convoy could not stop. Doctrine required it to keep moving. Rescue vessels, if present, would handle survivors. If not, a ship might be detached. Detaching a ship created another gap. The escort commander ordered immediate countermeasures. Starshell was used sparingly. Depth charges were dropped based on imperfect sonar contact. The sea swallowed sound. Radar picked up intermittent returns. The attack did not continue in a sustained way. That suggested the submarine had fired and slipped away. It also suggested the submarine might be waiting for a second chance. On shore, the operations office received the initial report hours later. It came through as a brief signal. Ship hit, position, estimated loss, convoy continuing. The watch officer marked it on the chart. The clerk stamped the form and placed the copy into the correct file. His hands moved with care that felt heavier than before. The reinforcement escorts were still not on station. They were closing, but not yet present. Had they joined earlier, the screen might have been stronger. It might have forced a submarine to break off sooner. No one could prove that. The Atlantic was full of chance. It remained a fact that the planned escort strength was not present when the torpedo struck. As the night passed, more reports came in. Another ship had dropped back due to mechanical trouble. In heavy weather, stragglers were vulnerable. The escort commander requested permission to detach a vessel to shepherd the straggler. He could not spare it. He ordered the straggler to increase speed if possible and maintain radio silence. He understood what that meant. He understood what might happen in the dark. In the operations office, tension grew by accumulation rather than spectacle. Each delay in communication lengthened uncertainty. Each plotted position was already old by the time ink reached the chart. The room's discipline became a restraint against panic. People spoke in measured tones. They used precise phrases. They did not permit themselves to imagine men in the water because imagination did not solve routing. The clerk remained at his station. He continued processing messages. He did not ask to be relieved. There was work, and work was the only thing he could do. He began to notice how the system treated his error. It did not treat it as an exception. It absorbed it. As it absorbed other small failures, it produced consequences out at sea. By the second day, the reinforcement escorts reached the convoy. Their arrival was reported as a simple line in a signal. No celebration, no relief noted in writing. The screen was strengthened. The escort commander could now run more effective search patterns. He could detach a vessel briefly without leaving an open lane. He could respond faster to contacts. That did not mean safety returned. Submarines did not stop because paperwork had been corrected. They attacked when opportunity appeared. Escort's strength changed the odds. It changed how long a submarine could stay close. It changed the confidence with which escorts could pursue. In the afternoon, another contact report arrived with a clearer basis. Radar had picked up a shape at a certain bearing. The escort commander ordered a destroyer to investigate. The destroyer turned hard and ran toward the contact. The submarine was forced to dive. Depth charges were dropped. Oil was later reported on the surface. Oil alone was not proof of destruction. The convoy continued. The escort screen was tighter than it had been when stretched thin. On shore, the routing office updated its charts. Revised instructions were sent for the next stage of passage. Weather continued to worsen. Some ships reported damaged superstructures. Others reported reduced speed. The convoy's average pace dropped. That extended its time in danger. The operational calculus became grim but familiar. Slower speed meant longer exposure. Pushing too hard risked ships falling out. In the days that followed, the convoy lost ships, not in a single catastrophic night. Losses came in scattered incidents. A straggler disappeared and was later listed as missing, presumed sunk. A ship took a torpedo but remained afloat long enough to be taken in tow. An escort reported a near miss. Each incident was recorded in terse lines. Each was translated into paper. Each was filed. The clerk's misfiled signal did not cause every loss. The Atlantic was not a machine with a single lever. Yet the hours of confusion did remove margin. They created a window in which escorts were not where planners believed they would be. They forced commanders to improvise under radio discipline. They consumed fuel in empty searches. They pressed the convoy into a zone with fewer defences than intended. The turning point for the clerk did not come as a dramatic confrontation. It came as a summons. Days after the convoy's passage, when the immediate crisis had moved on to other convoys and other charts, a senior officer requested a review of message handling. The Navy was learning that small administrative failures could carry operational impact. The office did not want a scandal. It wanted to know what happened and how to prevent repetition. In a small room away from the plotting table, the clerk and the senior clerk were questioned. They were asked about procedures. They were asked about staffing. They were asked about lighting, noise, and workload. They were asked whether labels were clear and whether convoy designations were easily confused. No one shouted. The tone was formal and controlled. The purpose was not mercy. It was control over a process that had shown its fragility. The clerk admitted what he had done. He described the moment of filing. He described the discovery. He did not embellish. He could not offer a defence that would change the outcome. He could only state facts. The senior officer listened and took notes. He asked how many messages were processed in a watch. He asked how long a clerk worked without relief. He asked whether double checks existed for high-priority routing corrections. The answers were uncomfortable. In wartime, offices ran lean. Personnel were moved to sea postings. Experienced staff were transferred. New clerks were trained quickly. The system depended on discipline, but discipline was enforced by expectation more than by capacity. The immediate result was not a public punishment. There was no court-martial for a civilian clerk. There were administrative consequences, a notation in a file, a reassignment to a less time-sensitive section for a period, a stern warning from a supervisor. For the clerk, the sharper consequence was private. He remained in that office knowing an error of his hands had widened danger for men he would never meet. The institutional response mattered more than a single reprimand. The office introduced modest changes. Priority routing signals were logged in a separate register as well as filed. That created redundancy. Trays were relabeled with clearer markings. Cross-checking convoy designations on immediate and urgent traffic was reinforced. During busy watches, a second clerk verified placement of certain categories of message. None of this eliminated risk. It acknowledged that paper systems needed safeguards as ships needed watertight compartments. The story of that convoy did not enter popular memory. There was no famous battle name attached to it. It was one convoy among hundreds. It moved through a cold sea under constant threat. The losses, when counted, were absorbed into statistics. Tonnage sunk, ships missing, survivors rescued, numbers that could be debated. Behind those numbers were chains of small actions. Some were heroic, some were merely competent, some were flawed. The clerk was not a hero. He did not claim to be. His work was necessary and it was human. In the years after, as communications improved and procedures changed, the kind of mistake he made became less likely. Yet in 1943, the war at sea depended on ink, carbon paper, and tired eyes under blackout lamps. On one afternoon in Liverpool, a correction sat in the wrong folder. At sea, escorts searched empty water while a convoy moved on without the reinforcement planned for it. In the hours that followed, ships were hit, screens were stretched, and decisions were made with less margin than intended. No single piece of paper explains the Atlantic War. This one shows how the war could turn on administration as surely as on guns and depth charges. If you want more stories about the overlooked people who kept the war moving, subscribe and join the channel.